Okay, this morning we're going to tell you two stories, okay? One of them's from the Bible. So if you have yours and you want to follow, go to John chapter 13. John chapter 13, we'll begin with the first verse. Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And verse 2, and during supper, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, he rose from supper, laid aside his garments, girded himself with a towel. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towels in which he was girded. In verse 6, he came to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? And Jesus answered him, What I am doing you do not know, but afterward you will understand. Peter said to him, You shall never wash my feet. And Jesus answered him, If I do not wash your feet, you have no part in me. Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet, but also my hands and my head. And Jesus said to him, verse 10, He who has bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, for he is clean all over. And you are all clean, but not every one of you. For he knew who was to betray him, and that was why he said, You are not all clean. Verse 12, he says, And when he had washed their feet and taken his garment and resumed his place, he said to them, Do you know what I have done to you? Do you know what I've done to you? Dr. Smith was a controversial physician in town. There was a time when he refused to take those last minute measures to allow a terminally ill patient to breathe or to resuscitate a patient in heart failure. And he knew the decision violated the policies of the hospital, which required tests and procedures and medical opinions. And it took a lot of time, it took a lot of money. And because Dr. Smith thought this process prolonged the agony of his patients and their families, he rejected those policies and he allowed the people to pass away. And the hospital, in turn, objected to his handling of these patients. And its medical staff, they began to investigate him, and they brought charges against Dr. Smith that, if found to be true, would be detrimental to the staff, and he would be dismissed. And Dr. Smith was smart. He was an experienced physician, and his colleagues who challenged him were intelligent, and they were well-intentioned also. And as is true in most conflicts, it's over authority. Who has the authority? And the divisions ran deep, and the conflict became severe throughout the hospital and throughout the community. After a large number of hearings, the medical staff voted to dismiss Dr. Smith, and he appealed his case, but the reporters, he lost it, but the reporters kind of came in and they kept what was going on in the hospital out there in the world, into the town and the community that they lived in. Well, Dr. Smith sued the hospital, demanding that he be allowed to admit patients into the hospital there. And the hospital hired a lawyer. His name was Kent Hansen, to defend the hospital's interests. And at the trial, Mr. Hansen, the lawyer, he began opening his statements by clarifying the issue in harsh terms. He says, Your Honor, Dr. Smith wants to quibble about the hearing procedures, but I'm here to talk about killing people. And in the end, the hospital ruled against Dr. Smith, dismissed him from the medical staff and a local hospital nearby, and His practice was then limited to his office and to a nearby local nursing home. And the dispute was angry and it was humiliating episode, and it was disturbing to everyone that was involved. Years passed by after this happened, and Mr. Hanson, the lawyer, experienced a spiritual renewal. And he was baptized and he joined the church, the same congregation where Dr. Smith and his wife attended. And each week he would see them sitting in their favorite pew right back in there. And Mr. Hanson, his walk with the Lord became so good that they invited him to become an elder in the church. And from time to time, he would discuss with the pastor whether he should reconcile between himself and Dr. Smith. But the pastor had also been on the hospital board at the time. And he says, I don't think that's going to work very good. Several physicians that were in that hospital were also against what he was doing. And they're also members of this church. And I don't think it would be good for us to bring the problem that was there inside our church. And so they never talked about it. Well, one day they had communion in their church. And when it came to communion, we call that the ordinance of what? The ordinance of humility. And foot washing is often the dividing line in a church. You know, people hear about it and they stay home, or they come to church and they read it in the bulletin that we're having communion. And after we have the sermon, half the church goes to their cars and they go home. It happens everywhere. So usually at that time, people would get up and leave, and they were unwilling to join in the foot washing service. They thought it was an awkward service and it didn't mean much to them. But on this Sabbath, Mr. Hanson thought that he better go and wash feet because he was now an elder. He was one of those people that never hung around for communion. He says, I hadn't been there for foot washing or communion in years. But now I'm a leader in a church. Maybe I ought to go to communion. So when they called for the men and the women to separate, he went down the hallway of the church and he turned down to the end of the room where the men would wash their feet. And as he did, he saw Dr. Smith standing there in the doorway. And, throughout the entire lawsuit and the court case, he had never spoken one-to-one with Mr. Smith. It was always lawyer against the judge and to the court. So, but he found out there was no way of going in there to wash someone's feet without passing him. And so as he walked through the door, he said, Good morning, Dr. Smith. How are you? He says, Well, I'm doing fine. He says, Do you have anybody to serve you to wash your feet? And he said, No, I don't. He says, Well, then may I wash your feet? And so they entered in the room together, and Dr. Smith motioned for Mr. Hanson, the lawyer, to sit down. And Dr. Smith went over and got a basin and a towel. And the lawyer removed his shoes and socks, and Dr. Smith knelt down and he washed his feet. And when he was through as ordinary, Mr. Smith, he got up and he washed the lawyer's feet. He washed Dr. Smith's feet. And for the first time in his life, he experienced true reverence. Emotions of awe and humility and brokenness and tenderness swept over his entire being. And thankfulness to God, who could break down walls and create love between these two men. After drying his feet, Mr. Hanson sat down beside the doctor and said to him, This is amazing, considering everything that has happened between us. And the doctor said, You know what? I've been watching you. And the Lord has shown me how much He means to you. And that's why the church gave you this responsibility, and He's changed your life. And Mr. Hanson replied to him, It's been a blessing to me. I've been coming here for many years now. You've seen me, but I see you and your wife dedicated to this church, sitting over there in those pews. You never miss. After all you've been through in this hospital and throughout this community, you're still here. And Mr. Smith patted Dr. Hanson on his arm. He says, there have been many mistakes made and many understandings. But the same Jesus who changed you has also sustained me through all of these years. And the lawyer then told him, I'm sorry for all the pain that I caused you and your family. And they stood up and they hugged one another. You know, one of those man hugs. A man hug that had meaning. And they remain friends to this day, and they pray for one another. And they share confidences. The physician and the lawyer, the professional equivalent of cats and dogs, the prosecutor and the prosecuted, a man whose livelihood was attacked, and his attacker. They washed each other's feet and they embraced. And if anyone ever asked whether they had ever seen a miracle, they tell this story. Look at verse 12. When he had washed their feet and taken his garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, because I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent them. If you know these things, then blessed are what? Blessed are you if you do these. So I'm going to invite us to separate ourselves, and the men will go back over in this room, the ladies will go back in the fellowship room. Let's separate ourselves, wash one another's feet, serve one another in kindness and humility, and then we'll come back in here and partake of our communion service.